hiring the right. Now we're ready to start because it's recording now. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to Hiring the Right Cannabis Employee, Employers Essentials for Success in the Cannabis Industry. My name is Charles Johnson. I'm an attorney and I'm an educator here at the Cannabis Workforce Initiative, and I'm excited to talk to you all about this topic. Just a few housekeeping rules. Just be sure that you write down any questions that may arise during the course of this presentation. I think we have a QA portion that you can list it in, or you can put it in the chat. And also
Chat.
to don't be afraid to ask any questions, all right? So, because 9 times out of 10, the question that you ask is something that somebody was thinking about. So like I said, don't be afraid to ask any questions. But now that we've gotten those out the way, let's go ahead and begin. Okay, so I would like to begin with an overview as we begin to dive into this topic of hiring the right employee. All right. So here are some overall questions that we will cover in this section that we want you all to be thinking about when it comes to hiring the right employee. What needs to be done during the application process? What are important overall considerations during the application process? Okay. By the end of this section, you'll have answers to these questions posed, and we want you all to remember that while posing these questions, the initial goal is we want you all to be thinking about what will make this person successful in this position that you're seeking to be filled. Okay, so what needs to be done during the application process? All right, so we all want to be mindful of these things, okay? And this is essentially, I just want you all to look at this process, and we want you to think of linear steps. And you're like, well, Charles, what does that mean? Essentially, this means that this process that I'm about to introduce to you all, it means that this process has to be built off each step, okay? And you can't skip steps. So many of you may intuitively know some of these steps that we're going to be going over from previous personal experience with hiring processes, or maybe your previous work experience dealt with some or all parts. But essentially, we want to provide new employers with guidance and steps to achieve the overall goal of finding the employee that will be successful. Okay, so these steps include developing job requirements, finding qualified employees, deciding who to interview, conducting successful interviews, and lastly, choosing the best person to hire. And remember, the overall goal when we go through these steps is to find an employee that will be successful in the job. Okay, so there's some important overall considerations during the application process that we want you all to be mindful of and that you should be considering. And some of those considerations actually overlap with legal considerations. So let's start with the commitment to social justice. As we all know, the MRTA is the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, and this is essentially what legalized recreational use of marijuana in New York State from seed to sale back in 2021 under the Cuomo administration. But aside from it just legalizing marijuana, there's a portion of the legislation that has a commitment to social justice where 50% of the licenses should be listed out to what's called social equity applicants. And these social equity applicants are due to the mass incarceration that was done by the war on drugs. And applicants with previous criminal records should be considered for employment, essentially. One of the other considerations during the application process that we want you all as employers to be mindful of is that we want you to be mindful of implicit bias, okay, when considering applications. And what is implicit bias? Essentially, implicit bias is being overly influenced by one characteristic or trait of an applicant that is not relevant to the job qualifications. And again, implicit bias happens all the time. It could be favorable or unfavorable. I can give you an example of implicit bias where you could have someone that you are cool with recommends a person, but to a position, but they don't meet the qualifications and you hire them anyway. Your bias towards the person that you're cool with is a reason why you brought that person on. On the other side of it, you could have an implicit bias to where there's someone that applies for a position and they actually are qualified, but a person that you know and that you like doesn't like them, so you don't hire them. Okay. So again, it could be favorable or unfavorable, but essentially we want you to have those considerations during the application process. And lastly, you see illegal practices, which actually leads over to the next slide. So there are criminal records during the application process. The applicant with an MRTA expunged criminal record can legally answer no to having a cannabis criminal record. Okay, so there under the MRTA, if you have a misdemeanor, if you have a misdemeanor cannabis record, it can actually be expunged, meaning that you can legally answer no. It has to be something from New York State. It can't be something from another state. Another consideration when it comes to criminal records is the Clean Slate Act. And the Clean Slate Act in New York State essentially seals some criminal records after a waiting period. Okay. In New York State and local laws, they may vary when it comes to what you can ask about criminal records, and you need to be very mindful of what your local jurisdiction may state, because again, there's the time periods of when you can actually ask for a criminal record. So as you see, there's the application, interviews, background check, and the offer portion, but you need to be very mindful of that. So these are things that you need to be thinking of when it comes to the application process. Okay, so we touched on a few things employers should consider during the application process, but there are important legal considerations during the process employers should have in mind, okay? And here are a few considerations that we want you introduced that we'll be addressing throughout the presentation. In other relevant sections of the steps during this application process, and as we continue, we want you to all think about the particular legal considerations. So some of these legal considerations, we touched briefly on it on the prior slide, is criminal records. Then you have discrimination and accessibility. What exactly does that look like? And how does accessibility tie into the application process? Pay. There's a legal consideration when it comes to pay that we'll touch basis on. And lastly, internet and social media. And again, this is during the application process. We want you all to be mindful of that. So let's start with discrimination, okay? So New York State and local and federal laws protect employees and applicants from discrimination, harassment, and retaliation based on protected classes, okay? Protected classes. So, but let's take a step back. Probably like, well, Charles, what is actually discrimination? Okay, well, discrimination is the treating of employees differently based on protected classes, okay? What is harassment? Harassment is behaviors focused on targeted, protected classes. Okay, and retaliations is actions altering any terms and conditions of employment. So an example is as an employer, if you discourage employees from complaining about not speaking up, or I'm sorry, complaining about speaking up about working conditions, and if an employee speaks up, their hours are cut or they lose their job, that's an example of retaliation. Okay, but here we have a list of in New York State's legally protected characteristics, and it goes from race, sex, national origin, age, color, sexual orientation. The list goes on, and I want everyone to be mindful we are all a part of protective classes and we all are part of protective characteristics. If you go through that list, you will be able to identify how you are part of that. We all have a race, we all have a sex, we all have a national origin, we all have an age. Like those are just examples. But also there's additional state protections here in New York that some people may not be aware of. And as an employer, it's extremely important that you're aware of this. And this goes to your salary, your history, your height and weight and hair are actually protected classes in New York State, okay? Reasonable accommodations, they can actually be requested relating to the application process. A lot of people believe that, or a lot of times we understand that reasonable accommodations are usually for employees once they've been hired, but no, they can actually be requested relating to the application process. So there can be a reasonable accommodation request for disabilities, for pregnancy, for religion, for creed, victims of domestic violence and sex offenses or stalking. And there's another thing to remember when it comes to reasonable accommodations. It's required to advise the reasonable accommodations availability during the process. Okay, so you're required to advise if a reasonable accommodation is available for that process when you're actually doing the application process. Now, next you'll see when it comes to accessibility, what exactly does that mean? And accessibility is the access to the same opportunities as everyone else. So think about individuals that have disabilities, people who have, hearing impairments, speech impediments, things, whatever the case may be. That's where accessibility comes into, okay? So as an employer, you want to make sure that all parts of the application process is readily available, okay? So that's including the postings, the recruitment, your interviews, if you have potential tests, thinking of the time period that you allocate for tests, if someone has a learning disability, that you may want to be considerate of those things, okay? Um, Also, you want to offer written material in accessible form. So in your application, you want to make sure that you have large print if possible. If there's someone that has a hearing impediment or a hearing disability, having audio tape or having a transcript or type of thing, closed caption. Or if someone's blind, if you have the access to Braille, if that's possible. Okay. Now again, reasonable accommodations and accessibility, they're a request, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to accommodate the request, because unless it causes an undue hardship, that's the exception to it. Then that's where, again, like a reasonable accommodation or accessibility thing could be denied. And there are a bunch of factors that go into undue hardships in terms of accessibility, and I'm just going to name a few of them just so you can kind of be mindful of it. But again, it can go to the overall size of the business and its budget, the benefit provided by the accommodation versus the hardship providing the reasonable accommodation, the cost of it, or the problems it will cause. The hardships include those that may be caused by other employees. And remember, it must be reviewed on by a case-by-case basis. So because you're able to accommodate one individual applicant may not necessarily mean that you can accommodate another applicant, but you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And as an employer, I want you all to be very, very careful about this, okay, and be mindful, because be careful, because it's more difficult to prove a hardship, and it's even more difficult to prove it during an application process. So just be very mindful of those things. And lastly, all medical information must be kept separate and confidential. All right, so now let's move along. Remember, the overall goal is to find an employee that will be successful in the job, okay? And in order for us to achieve that goal, let's dive into the first step of the application process, which is developing job requirements. Okay, so here are some overall questions that we will be covering in this section that we want you all to be thinking about when it comes to the first step of developing job requirements. Okay, first question is, what are job-related duties and responsibilities? What are ways to identify job duties and responsibilities? And what should a job description include? Again, oh, I'm sorry, you guys. That was my finger. By the time we finish this, you guys, my apologies. By the time we end this portion of the presentation, this section, you should have answers to all these questions, okay? And again, we want you, as an employer, when you're developing these questions, we want you to think about the overall goal, which is what will make this person successful in this position. Okay, so the first step is important to focus on job-related duties and responsibilities. But now the question poses, what are job-related duties and responsibilities? Okay, and job-related duties and responsibilities can be determined by three things. And the first is knowledge. And essentially, that's the information a person needs to know for this position. So if I give you an example of a bud tender, the knowledge base of the bud tender, you would want knowledge of the product. All right. The next determining factor when it comes to what job duties are is skills. So, and skills essentially are the specific task a person must be able to perform. So, an example of that when it comes going back to the bud tender piece, so we have the knowledge of the product. The skill will be the selling of the product to customers. That's what you would want to list, okay? And then the next would be abilities. So abilities essentially is being able to demonstrate knowledge, skill, and behaviors necessary to ensure that the person can complete a task. So you would list, ability to explain accurate information about the products. Okay, this is known as KSAs. So again, when focusing on job-related duties and responsibilities, it's important that you are focusing on the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities of that desired position, and it's also known as KSA. Okay, so the next question posed was, what are the ways to identify duties and responsibilities? And there are a few ways to identify, okay, identifying it. One way is actually reviewing the job description to identify related duties and responsibilities. Um, you can, and this also can be tied into reviewing job descriptions from similar industries related to the position. So if you think back to a bud tender, like, you can go into, you can go online and look at other dispensaries or just type in Google, like if I'm looking for a bud tender position, type in Google, bud tender positions, and you'll see different posts and job descriptions of that, and you'll notice as you're going through that certain language or certain tasks that are similar across the board. These are the things that you want to review. Okay, so that's one of the first ways you want to review the job descriptions. All right, and look at similar industry related positions as well. Then next, you want to an employer should identify transferable duties in other industries. Okay, so when you think about, you know whether it's hospitality, whether it's healthcare, whether it's cannabis, whether it's financial, whatever, there are certain things that are transferable skills. So we've listed a few just to give you an example. Sales of products are transferable duties in other industries. Customer service, cash management, knowledge of software. These are transferable skills and transferable duties. So we want you all to identify those things, okay? And then next, after you've reviewed and identified, it's important that you prioritize the essential and preferred duties and responsibilities for the desired position that you seek to be filled. Okay, so now that you as the employer has focused on determining what are job related duties and responsibilities, aka KSAs, remember? And now you have used your ways to identifying job duties. The next question posed is, what should a job description include? And simple answer is, a job description should include sections. And here we have listed out sections that should be included on the job description for your desired position. So on that job description section, I mean, on that job description, there should be at least six sections on there. One where it's the title, the overview of the position, and we'll go into detail about each of these sections. Duties and responsibilities. Then you have the minimum qualifications and requirements that you're seeking. Lastly, you have your EEO statement, which is very important, and then the pay range is required under New York law. So here's a sample job description for a bud tender using the job description section that I had previously mentioned to you all. So as you see here, the title, if we're giving the example of a bud tender, you would have a title, you would have bud tender. In the overview section, you want to lay out, the overview of that position. So you would state, seeking a passionate employee to provide services and assistance to customers through sharing of product knowledge, answering questions, and completing retail sales transactions. That's giving them an overview of it. All right. Next is the duties and responsibilities. And in this section, you want to list out, okay, what you want them to do. You want them to be maintaining data knowledge on products in the industry, meeting any required sales goals, accurately using required transaction systems and software. And you see on here, it says demonstrate good communication skills and customer relations. Now, it's important that I want you guys to notice that these three sections are highlighted. The reason why these three sections are highlighted in this portion is because those three sections are what's considered the job related sections. So those parts are extremely important because those are the job related sections. Okay. But then after that section, you see we've highlighted the last three, okay? And these last three are the highlight, I mean, of this job sample are the legal requirements that are needed. So when you have your minimum qualifications and requirements, this is where you should be listing the age, okay? Where required by law, because we all know under the MRTA, you have to be at least 21 years of age to consume recreational cannabis. Okay. If you're looking for a bud tender, if you want to have any individual that has to touch the plant, they have to be at least 21 years of age. So you want to make sure that you're putting up the minimum qualifications that are required. If you require for education to be there, that needs to be placed there. Experience, that needs to be placed there. Okay. The next is the EEO statement. Again, this is very important because this pretty much lets everyone know that you understand the EEO laws when it comes to the state, and that in this is one of the main common ones that you'll see, where it states all qualified applicants will receive consideration for employment without regard to their race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., by any other federal, state, or local protected characteristics. Okay. So again, EEO statement is very important because you want to let people know that, hey, by applying, you are not going to be discriminated against. And lastly, you see on here, it says pay range is required. It's pay transparency, because in New York State, now the law is that you, as an employer, you must list the minimum and maximum salary range or hourly rate on the application. Okay. I know you guys probably remember a few years back when you used to apply for jobs, it would state, $50,000, and then it would just have a dash and keep going, or it wouldn't list anything else. Or at the bottom of the application, it would say, hey, salary is dependent on age and education, or education experience and things of that nature. That's not the case anymore. Now you are required by law to list the minimum and maximum of the salary range or the hourly rate. Okay, so now that you've developed the job requirements, let's address the next step. And the next step is finding qualified employees. Okay, so in this section of finding qualified employees, these are the questions that we will be covering in this section. And by the end of the section, you should be able to understand and answer these questions. So we want these questions to be going in the back of your head while you're in this step of the process. Let me start off. It says, how do I identify qualified applicants? Where are places to find qualified applicants? And what are possible risk and legal considerations when finding qualified applicants? So here is a snapshot of how we will be addressing those questions that I just posed in the previous, I posed in this section in the previous slide. We will be discussing advertising and postings, where to do the advertisings, where can you do these postings, what gathering information about applicants, what are the do's and don'ts when it comes to that, the legal considerations when finding employees, because we always want to make sure that we're legally compliant, and search options. What do search options look like when it comes to finding qualified employees? Okay, so how do I identify qualified applicants was that question. And one of the ways employers can identify qualified applicants is by advertising and posting the clear job description for the desired position. So you can as you list an advertisement and posting, you should be able to post up the entire job description, and there should be a summary including the EEO statement and the pay ranges that that. And if you want to look back on the previous example that I provided, that shows you that that summary. Okay. Another way to identifying qualified applicants is by gathering information about the applicants. And the way that you gather information about the applicants is through the application process. So it means, you could post an application and have them fill it out, or you could have them submit a resume. And when you have them submit a resume, I always encourage them to submit a cover letter with the resume, because sometimes the cover letter serves as a glimpse of what their work experience is, and also may include include additional information that the resume may not necessarily cover. Okay, so we know ways of identifying qualified employees. Now the question is, where are places to find qualified applicants? Okay, and here we have listed some of the places that you can find qualified applicants. All right, the first one's job banks. It's a shameless plug, but CWI, we have a Canada Jobs link. that you can use to find qualified applicants. You have the New York State Department of Labor. They have a virtual career center. Okay, there's unemployment centers, career centers, but those job banks are essentially places where people can post their jobs. I mean, their resumes and things of that nature, and you can look and find individuals that way. Another way are local connections. So you can think about your community-based organizations, because a lot of the community-based organizations are tapped in, especially when it comes to cannabis, and they know people, that are looking for jobs and could help assist you in that capacity. Another piece is industry related. I'm sorry, under local connections, you have your community boards. If you live in New York City, there are community boards here. I serve on one of my community boards where I live, and that's always a great resource because there are always people looking for jobs. There's always people coming to the district manager's offices, submitting resumes or asking about, job postings. That's another way. Okay. Then you have your schools, you know, um, and people that you've gone to school with, or people that from schools that could potentially help you. And then personal referrals too. Word of mouth is always good, but again, that's not, you don't want to just rely on word of mouth. Word of mouth. But again, local connections, tapping into the community is always a key thing. Um, Industry related conferences and events are always big too, because you will find people there, whether they're employers trying to get business, or you'll find potential employees, that are looking for jobs, that have resumes and cover letters on hand, CVs on hand type of stuff. So be creative and think about that. There's conferences and you might have local events in your community. Check that out, because there's going to be people that are searching for a job. Then you have recruiting agencies. And recruiting agencies are the more common ones that we've seen. So think about Robert Half, Monster, Zip Recruiter. These are recruiting agencies. But then if you can find cannabis specific agencies, recruiting agencies, that's helpful too. And then lastly, social media. Okay, so when it comes to social media, I always encourage people to utilize LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is one of the last free organic places where you can still submit job postings, and it's focused on professionals as well. So they have groups that are cannabis industry, or cannabis specific groups, where you can say, hey, I'm looking for, a bud tender at my location. Please have them send a resume to this email, or DM me if you have anybody. You can do the same thing when it comes to Facebook as well. Facebook, Instagram. I always say I'm mindful of or wary about Facebook and Instagram, because sometimes they pick and choose when you're violating community standards. But nevertheless, you can use social media in that regard. You can slide in people's DMs, to get information and ask and inquire. Hey, do you know somebody that's looking to work in a dispensary? That type of thing. Okay. So what are the possible risks when finding qualified applicants? Okay. So some of the risk are searching the internet or social media for information. Okay. And I want to be very, very clear. It's a difference from what I just spoke about using social media as to post and find applicants, as opposed to searching the internet or social media for information. Meaning that you're searching and you find somebody and you're looking in and you're doing a deep dive search on that particular individual that could be an applicant. You have to avoid that risk. Okay, that's a consideration that we want you all to be mindful of. Okay, and using information unrelated to job duties, responsibilities, and requirements. Okay, all of this goes into the bias aspect, because again, you want to avoid bias. You want to make sure that you're asking, or you're looking for job duty things that are related to your job duties, responsibilities, and requirements. And you see under risk, you have AI, and I say this all the time. AI is, it's artificial intelligence, it's machine learning, but remember, you can teach a machine how to be biased. You can teach a machine how to do the wrong thing or the right thing. And as employers, you don't want to run the risk of an algorithm having you miss out on a great employee that you can have. So just overall considerations, just be mindful of when you're trying to find a qualified employee. Those are just some of the risks. And we have it listed again: gathering information unrelated to job duties, responsibilities, and requirements. Again, we want you to avoid that. okay? Because doing that, you're kind of reinforcing the whole bias aspect that you want to avoid, okay? And ensure people, the person searching knows what to seek, okay? Meaning that if you have somebody going out searching for stuff, they need to know what they're looking for in this qualified employee. That's why the first step is important, because if you identify your job description and you know what you're looking for, when it comes to this step, they know what they're looking for, okay? Um, and then the last bullet point, it says legal requirements related to criminal records. There's also a risk that may have legal requirements related to criminal records, which leads me to my next point, that there's legal considerations when finding qualified employees, okay? And right here we're gonna discuss that in more detail. Oh, I'm so sorry, you guys. We're going to discuss this in more detail, okay? So applicants with an MRTA-related expunged criminal record can legally answer no to having a low-level misdemeanor cannabis record in New York, okay? We talked about that briefly. But then there's also the New York State Clean Slate Act seals some criminal records for a waiting period. So these are considerations when you're finding a qualified employee that we need you to be mindful of. Other thing is that in New York State, you cannot ask about an arrest, okay? You cannot ask about an arrest. Um, but we have something called ban the box in New York State too. And essentially ban the box, it's not a New York State law, but there are local laws that apply to ban the box. And ban the box essentially means that an employer cannot ask an application about having a criminal record and or pending criminal case. Okay, these things, they vary based on your local laws in New York when it comes to pertaining to ban the box. Again, if you live in New York City, there's the Fair Chance Act, which is essentially ban the box, meaning that you cannot ask about criminal records or do a criminal background check until after a conditional offer is made. But if you live in Buffalo, Rochester, or Westchester counties, they have a ban the box laws for private employers. If you live in Albany, Syracuse, or Ithaca counties, they have certain ban the box laws for public employees. The biggest thing that I want you to take away from this is that it varies. So you need to make sure that you check your local laws. Okay, but New York State does not prevent employers from asking on an application about a criminal record, but Article 23A of the New York State Corrections Law states that employers cannot deny employment solely upon criminal records when there are limited exceptions. So we want you all to be mindful of those considerations when you're finding a qualified employee. Okay, so as an employer, remember the overall goal is to find employees that will be successful in the job, okay? So now as an employer, you've developed your job requirements for the position and you have identified qualified applicants. So now let's address the next step, which is deciding who to interview. Okay, so here's some overall questions that we are going to be covering in this section that we all want you to be thinking about when it comes to this third step of deciding who to interview. What information should be considered when deciding who to interview? Um, how do I compare the candidates when deciding who to interview? By the time we complete this section, you'll have the answers to these questions posed. So let's go ahead and get started. So we pose the question, what information should be considered when deciding who to interview, okay? And when determining what information should be considered, best practices encourages that you should prioritize duties and responsibilities, okay? That's the first thing you should do. You should focus on relevant information, but you need to be prioritize duties and responsibilities, okay? And then next, we want you to consider whether there are any gaps with your current employees. So think about it, if you have 3 or 4 employees and they're already strong in various areas, like if we're using the bud tender as an example, you have selling of products, knowledge of the product, use of computer skills, organizing the product. Those are the duties that you're prioritizing. Then you can consider whether there are any gaps with your current employees. So you might say, hey, well, Lisa is great at organizing products, and John is great at using computer systems, and Mike is excellent at knowledge of the product, but maybe we're lacking on selling the product, or somebody who has knowledge of selling the product. Maybe that's a gap that needs to be filled. So during that portion, when you're deciding who to interview, again, consider whether there are gaps. Then also after you do that, then now that you've done that, the next question is, how do you as an employer compare the candidates to decide who to interview? And the way that you do that is by developing a method to compare information. Okay. And this can be done by listing each job duty based on priority, as we mentioned. So if selling the product is your priority, for the bud tender, then maybe you want to base that as a priority, or if knowledge of the product is a priority, or organizing the product, whatever you decide as an employer, that is your place to do. And then the next thing is considering a rating information. So after you list out jobs based on priority, figure out a rating information on how you want to rate it. So you can use some or strong, some, minimal, or none. You can use, excellent, great, good, okay, like, whatever you want to decide. But the key thing is you want to have something that you can use to rate, which actually kind of leads to the next slide. So remember I mentioned to develop a method to compare your information. So you're listing each job duty based on the priority. Well, here is a sample comparison chart of what that method would look like, okay? So as you see here, and we're just going to use the example of bud tender because I've been using that throughout the course of this presentation. But let's just say you're looking for a bud tender, and you will have your priorities, your job duties based on priority listed. So you see there's selling products, knowledge of the product, use of computer systems, and organizing the product. Now remember, you can have multiple job duties that you prioritize. You could prioritize 10, 15, or whatever, but the goal is, or the point is that you want to have it listed out. Okay. The next you see that you have your applicant. So you would list out, which applicant that you have, that you want to decide who to interview on. And you will be looking at their information that they provided to you, and you will be rated. And the information that they provided is the resume, the application, the cover letter, and from there you will rate them. Okay, you will decide what the rating system would be. So after you listed the job descriptions based on priorities, um, as you see on this chart right here, this is an example of how that would look. So you have an individual that, okay, person one, when it comes to selling the product, based on their based on their application, based on their resume, cover letter, whatever you use to determine this is where you've ranked them. So you say, okay, they're minimal when it comes to selling the product, but when it comes to knowledge of the product, they're very strong. Okay. Um, you can look at person two. When it comes to selling the product based on what they provided, it says that, okay, they're very strong on that. Okay. But the knowledge of the product, it says that, shows that it's non-existent, but they're very strong in organizing the product, and then you see person three, where it's similar. It's whatever they've stated on on their application and what's on their resume and cover letter. You want to rank it. Okay. And then once you've ranked it, then you can look at everybody as a whole and you can compare to see who who you want to move on to the next step to with. Okay, so now that you've developed your requirements for the position, you've identified qualified applicants. Okay, you've decided who to interview from the applicant pool. Now let's address the next step, which is conducting a successful interview. Okay, so here are some overall questions that we'll be covering in this section that we want you to be thinking about when it comes to this fourth step of conducting successful interviews. So, what is the structure for conducting an interview? What should be said when opening and closing an interview? What types of questions should be asked? And what are illegal questions during an interview? And lastly, are there effective ways to get information during the interview? Okay. So let's address the first question. What is the structure for conducting an interview? Okay. And here is a snapshot of the overall structure for conducting an interview. And we recommend that you start off in these three sections. There's the opening of the interview, and we'll be going through this in detail as I progress in the presentation. But essentially, the structure is that you have an opening for the interview. Then you have job-related questions that you will be providing during the interview. And lastly, there's a closing of the interview. Those are the three. That's the structure of essentially when it comes to conducting an interview. So now let's dive a little deeper into the structure. So here's an overview of how to prepare for the interview, okay? We talked about what the structure was, but now this is how you prepare for it. And we'll be taking a deeper dive and we'll be addressing developing the opening, developing job-related questions, how does that look? Developing a closing, and then lastly, some effective interviewing techniques and practices that I think will be extremely helpful for you during this process. So, what should be said when opening an interview? Okay, so as an employer, when preparing for the opening, the first thing that needs to be stated is the greeting. Okay, and the greeting could be here. This is an example. You could say, thank you for meeting with me. Would you like some water? That's just a quick example of a greeting. Okay, you want to avoid small talk. All right. That's very, very important. You want to avoid small talk. You want to get straight to business when it comes to this. All right. Um, Next, you want to provide a short description of with only your name or and position. Now, to be clear, if you have multiple people that are there in the interview, this is extremely important because then it allows the applicant to know who the players are in the room and the power dynamics in the room as well. So that's something that you want to do. Very short description. You don't want to go, speak too long about it. Okay. The next you want to explain how the interview will you want to explain how the interview will flow. Okay. So an example would say, you could say, okay, for the interview, I will begin by asking you questions, then respond to any questions you may have, and end by reviewing next steps. So there you laid out a roadmap to the applicant to let them know, okay, this is how the process is going to go, and there's not going to be any surprises. Okay. Then lastly, after you've done that and you've laid out the roadmap, you want to transition into the questions. Okay. So you could simply do a transition by saying, let's start with questions. Something very simple. Okay. And remember, for all interviewees, you want to be consistent with the way that you open. So when you have person one come in, you want that to be the exact same way that you interviewed and opened up with person three. Okay, so when considering what types of questions should be asked, develop job related questions, okay, based on the job description. That's first and foremost, okay? And after you've done that, I want you to review the questions for legal concerns, all right? And we encourage everyone to seek assistance from experts when you're unsure about anything that could potentially have legal ramifications. And then you want to, after you've developed and reviewed, you want to create the same questions for all interviewees, okay? Because again, this leads to the fair comparisons of all interviewees, and it avoids any potential claims of discrimination from the employer. Okay, so what types of questions should be asked? Okay, so when you're interviewing an applicant or a candidate, the answers they provide play an important role in the decision-making process for you. Okay, but in order for you to ensure that you get the best answers that you're looking for, the types of questions that the employer asks during the interview are extremely key. So the following are the types of questions that are used during interviews. Okay, so you see here broad-based questions. Broad-based questions are actually the questions that you should be using to initiate the interview. So the first questions that you ask should be broad-based questions, okay? And those are asking general questions, all right? Behavior-based questions are another type that you should be using. And that's you're asking for examples of previous knowledge, skill, and abilities, okay? Because that will give you an idea of to determine what was said on their I'm sorry, on their application and on their resume, you can compare and contrast, okay, to see if that matches up with some of the stuff that they may have said or what they listed in their cover letter. Then you have situational based, okay, and situational based are you're asking you're asking how a person may handle a situation at work, which is extremely important because you want to know engage emotional intelligence of your employees. So here we have provided you with some examples of the different types of interview questions that you can pose. And going back to broad base, remember I said it was general questions. So a general question example would be, what do you know about this dispensary? Um, or why are you interested in working here? See how those are very general questions, but again, they're focused on the job. Okay, they're job related questions that you're asking. You're not deviating from that. Okay. Next, the behavioral base, as I mentioned before, those are examples of previous experiences. So, example of that type of question would be, sir, could you describe a challenging customer service experience and how you handled it? And remember, as an employer, if they say, they deviate from that, if it's with the customer or with a salesperson, you can adjust the question. So you can say, hey, was if it can be with the customer or with the salesperson if you have no direct experience. But the point is that you want to ask for that example. Okay, another example would be describe a situation where you had to convince someone to do something. That's a crafty way of saying, okay, as a bud tender, what's your persuasion skills? That's what you're wanting to, you're essentially trying to grab from them. And then another example is describe a software system that you have used and how you learned to use it. Again, these are examples of their previous experience, and that's why you're asking those behavior-based questions. And lastly, you see situational-based questions, and like I said before, those are how a person may handle a situation at work. So, example of that would be, what will you do if you do not get along with a coworker? No, that's a good question that you want to know. You want to know what the emotional intelligence of that person is. Are they going to go straight punch somebody? Or are they going to, whatever the case may be? But again, you want to ask questions of that nature so you can get the answers that you need. Now, next, as you begin to formulate the interview questions, we want you all to ask yourself, what are illegal questions during an interview? Okay. And here we've listed some areas where legal consideration should be taken during the application process in this step. And notice that we touched on some of these earlier. So we want you all to see that these legal areas can cross over to other steps in this process. And as you see on here, discrimination is one. So remember, federal and New York state and local laws protect employees and applicants from discrimination, harassment, and retaliation based on protected characteristics. Okay. So be sure your questions aren't discriminatory based on protected characteristics. And remember, I said before, in New York State, height, weight, and hair are also considered protected characteristics. So you got to just be very mindful. When it comes to salary, remember, mention the pay transparency aspects of it, and you cannot legally ask somebody what was your previous salary. That is prohibited by law. You cannot ask that. Okay, so that's a consideration that I want you all to be mindful of when conducting an interview. Criminal records, remember that in New York State and local laws vary when it comes to what can be asked about a criminal record and when. So just be very mindful of that you don't violate that. And then social media, as an employer, just please be mindful that you cannot, I repeat, you cannot request or require usernames, login information, and passwords of personal accounts as a condition of hiring. Okay, so here we have provided you with some legal examples of the questions that I just talked to you about. And these are common questions, you guys. I promise you, they're common questions that you may have never considered or even realized were illegal, or could potentially create legal consequences. Okay. Um, if you look in here, are you planning to have children? No, you cannot ask that question, okay? Because when you're asking that question, you're asking a question about family status or potentially gender, because you don't know who you're talking to. The appropriate question would be, what are your career goals? Okay. The question of, have you ever been arrested? That question is prohibited. I remember I mentioned that before. What salary were you making? questions that about previous salary are prohibited. Now, the appropriate way to try to address that would be asking them, are you willing to work in the salary range? Okay. And because you've actually listed out the actual amount that was listed. So you can ask them, are they willing to work in the salary range? If they say yes, then you got that, you've gotten an answer to a certain degree. Now, again, these are common questions, so it's very important that you are mindful of the legality of the questions and based on what is said and discussed in this particular class. I want you all to be very mindful of that, okay? Okay, so now that you've formulated your interview questions, you've asked yourself about the legality of the questions. Now it's time to review the interview questions, okay? And excuse me, here we have provided a simple approach to how you can actually review these these interview questions. And it's like a checklist that you can use. So when you're looking at these questions, ask, is it job related? If not, do not ask the question. Okay. Um, if it is job related, then you have to ask, is it legal? If it's not legal, don't ask the question. And then if it's job related, review the questions to ensure it's phrased appropriately. Remember, I mentioned to you before, about the salary and stuff like that. Make sure it's phrased properly. And if you have questions or are unsure about that, you can always seek advice and assistance when it comes to that piece. Um, and then lastly, after you've done that, then you want to prioritize the questions. What are the most important questions that you want to ask? What are the questions that, are not the least important, but, questions that you don't need a dire response to, okay? Make sure you prioritize the questions. Okay, so now you've prepared interview questions. We've reviewed the questions. Now you must prepare how, as an employer, you will close the interview, okay? And you want to have the full structure and organize. You want to have the full structure or an organizing of this before calling any applicant in for an interview. Okay, so the biggest thing is you want to before you ask your desired questions, you want to transition into the closing. I'm sorry, yeah, you want to transition to the closing. Okay, so you want to ask a person. This is remember you're in the preparing portion of it. So this is you mapping out your game plan before someone is physically there. Okay. So after you've done that question portion, you want to transition into the closing. You want to ask if a person has any questions. So an example would be, hey, Lisa, before we end our interview, do you have any questions for us? Now, as an employer, I want you guys to be very, very, very mindful of this. Please be prepared with responses to common questions, okay? Because just like you can look up, think about when you're an employee and how you can look up things, common questions that employers ask, they can do the exact same thing. And there are certain questions that, as an employer, you should be able to be prepared to actually answer. So be mindful of that, okay? Advise that you will be doing a follow-up. Please do not commit to a time for connecting again. I always say that this is important not to do that, because if you overcommit and you say, hey, we'll get back to you on Friday, if this is a person that you are highly considering and one of your top candidates and you don't get back to them Friday, and let's just say it's a week later, they may take that as an inclination of, oh, they didn't choose me, they chose somebody else, so I moved on. Or if you have people that are looking at or applying to multiple jobs, you stating that could determine whether or not they're delaying something else with another job application to wait on your response, or if they need to move on. So just don't commit to it. The best thing to say is we will be following up, and do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. Okay. And then finally, as you're preparing to close the interview, you want to thank the person for coming. And again, for all interviewees, be consistent with the way you close. Okay. Notice the pattern when it comes to introducing the questions and conduct and closing. You want to be consistent with the way you do that. Okay. So here again is a snapshot of the structure for conducting the interviews that we have gone over in detail. Okay, so again, I just want you all to remember, and this is a quick recap, that you You start with an interview by opening the interview, and in that opening you'll have a greeting, you have an introduction of the position, and the person's name only. Avoid the small talk. Okay, and then you want to lay out the roadmap of how this interview will go. So you want to tell them the flow of the interview. And then once you've completed that portion, you want to transition into asking job related questions. And remember, all of these questions should be prepared questions. You should not be freestyling these questions, okay? And again, only ask job related follow-up questions as well during this interview process. And then after that, you will transition into closing the interview. When you're closing the interview, you want to respond to questions from the interviewee if they have any. You want to explain the follow-up process that we had talked about, and then you want to thank the person at the end of the interview. Okay, so now that you have the structure down, um, and you have your questions ready to go, we want to address some important listening and communication techniques while conducting interviews. And remember, the goal is to gather information to determine who to hire. That is the biggest goal when it comes to this. So when it comes to listening, your 80% of the time in that interview should be the employer, i.e., you, listening. Okay, 20% of that is should be talking. Okay, and in that 20% should consist of 10% of you asking questions, 8% of you responding to questions, and 2% of you talking about yourself or the position. Because again, remember, you are trying to gather information to determine who to hire. And if you're talking majority of the time about yourself, especially or the position, you're not going to help. You're not helping. You're not helping. You're not getting the information that you need. Okay. The next you want to another technique is to ask a person to repeat information that you may have missed. Okay, there's no problem with asking a person could they repeat that. Okay, and if a person raises personal issues in the interview, do not respond to the personal issues. Okay, try to ignore it and continue with the questions. An example of a technique that you can use while communicating that would be, hey, this is not information we use to make employment decisions. You can assure them that and then go back to the questions that you have prepared to get the thing back on track. Okay. We believe that if you use these techniques in conjunction with the recommended structures and steps, you will further maximize the effectiveness of your interview. Okay, so here we have listed some recommended best practices for employers when conducting the actual interview. Okay, so this list should serve as a supplement to the recommended structure that we've gone through. So again, we recommend that you use the same questions for each interviewee. That's number one. That's important. We want you to use those questions. We want you to know the candidate's application and resume. That is extremely important. You want you don't want to go into an interview and you don't know anything about what this person is bringing to the table. Okay, you want to do a little bit of due diligence. So you want to identify where it relates to the questions that you will ask. That's another reason why it's so important, because by reviewing it, then you'll know what questions that you need to be asking. Okay, then you want to develop a way of taking notes, because the way that you're taking notes is going to be important to the next portion of this process, because you have to compare and then leave enough time for the interview. Okay, so again, you want to be mindful of the time periods that are being used. That's why I said cut out all the small talk. Make sure that you're doing, you're getting straight to the point so you can have enough time to maximize that 80% of them speaking. Okay, and I repeat, do not engage in side discussions that are not job related. Okay, because the moment that you do that, then you open the door to all types of nonsense. Okay, and when you're unsure about an issue, do not ask questions or comment about something. Uh, and that's very important. And the reason why it's important is because as an employer, um, if you speak on something that you're unsure about, and it in the interview, it could possibly lead to legal ramifications or misinformation to the candidate and the applicant. Okay, so if you're unsure, then just say that you're unsure. Hey, I'm unsure about that. I'll get back to you. And remember, you can always interview the person later again. You can bring them back in. Okay, so now you've developed your job description, I mean your job requirements for the position. You've identified the qualified applicants. You decided who you want to interview from the applicant pool, and you've properly conducted the interviews, which is very, very, very important and brings us closer to our overall goal. Now let's transition to the next and the last step, choosing the best person to hire. So here are some overall considerations when it comes to choosing the best person to hire that we want you all to be thinking about in this fifth step. Um, Here's the questions. How should the final candidates be evaluated? What additional information can be requested about a final candidate? And what are legal considerations when deciding who to hire? Okay, so by the time we, complete this section, you will have answers to the questions posed, and these questions should always be in the back of your head when you're in this step, okay? So now we're at the point now that we have some prospects for your desired position, but the question now posed is, how should final candidates be evaluated? Okay, so first we recommend that you list the job task that you want to compare. Okay, then by listing them, we want you to be reviewing the rating allocated when deciding who to interview. Okay, and then you will be prioritizing the job duties for selecting the final candidates. Okay, and then you'll be considering rating information provided for each of the job duties. So you will be looking at the pre-interview, you should have a number, and then you should have a post-interview number, okay? And that's what you'll be using to compare. So first you will be listing that. The next, we want you to identify candidates that you want to compare. So you need to be reviewing the notes from the interviews based on the things that you've heard in the interviews. That's what's going to help you determine, and then remove anyone that does not meet the qualifications during the interview. Okay, so again, the reason why that's important is because think back to our discussion about implicit bias and how we want to avoid that. The best way to avoid it is by removing anybody that does not meet the qualifications during the interview. Okay, and then you want you to consider the rating the information provided for each task. So similar how you did prior to the interview, after the interview, you will do the exact same thing. Based on what they said, based on how they presented, how would you rate these things? And then finally, after you've done those things and you've identified, then you'll compare the candidates. So here is a sample of how you would compare those candidates. So notice how we have our priorities listed. We have selling the product, we have knowledge of the product, we have the use in computer systems, organizing the product. We have all of our priorities. I mean, our duties and responsibilities that we're looking at. Okay. Notice on the interviewee part, we have pre/post interview. So we have the ranking or the rating system for the pre, and we have the ranking system for post. So let's just look at one of them. Remember, the hypothetical is this is a bud tender. So let's just look at selling products. So the first person in their application and pre-interview, we rated them as minimal under that particular area. Okay, but post the interview, after you actually met with them and spoke with them, you said, "Oh, well, actually, they do have some experience with selling products." So you gave them a 2. Notice how they were 3, and then they actually bumped up to 2. Um, the second person, as you see, they were an all-star when it came to selling the product. They were strong, and then their post was the same thing, so they were consistent. That's a major plus. Um, Person number 3 is interesting because before the interview, based on what they provided, it stated that hey, they had some experience when it came to selling the product, but upon further, conversation with them, the detailed questions, the specific questions that you asked during the interview, you found out that no, this person is very strong in this area. Okay, so you would use that same analysis and just be comparing and contrasting for each of the areas that you've listed on your chart. Now, again, remember, this is a sample chart, so you could have way more duties, but you still need to prioritize those tasks, and you can look in this and you can determine the gaps that you need in your particular workplace to determine which of those priorities make sense. Okay, so like I always tell people, remember to look at this individually, and then consider any of the gaps. Okay, so hypothetically, if you say person one is out and they don't meet the qualifications, cool. Now you have person two or three, and then you're like, okay, well, I don't know who to choose from when it comes to two or three based on what I need. Okay, that's fine. Because remember, if you need to, you can consider them for to interview again, just like any other job. You know, when you have a first interview, a second interview, a third interview, all those interviews play a crucial part. And questions that may have not have been answered in interview one or two, they get clarified in the following one. So don't be afraid to call people back in. Okay, and now that you have compared candidates, there are some things that we want you as an employer to consider for the final candidate. Okay, so we want you to consider additional meetings. Like I said to you before, if you have any of these meetings that you have with these employees, there should be prepared questions. So for the final candidates, have prepared questions that you want them to answer. You can have them explain, and then you can also explain more about the job in that final candidate selection. Okay, make sure that you're checking the references during this final candidate phase. Okay, um, you can make an offer or conditional offer, but to be honest, in New York State, most people are doing conditional offers because of the criminal background aspect that I mentioned to you before and being mindful of it. So it's probably better to do a conditional offer, let them clear the background checks and all of those things, and then make that a finalized offer, a full offer. Other pieces, legal considerations when it comes to finalizing a candidate. So always want you to check your local jurisdictions to make sure that there's inquiries about criminal records don't violate the application process. And then again, once the final candidate is confirmed, follow up with all applicants. Okay, so let them know that, hey, we've selected someone for this position. Unfortunately, we decided to go another route, but we encourage you to apply to other positions that we may have, whatever the case may be. But you don't want to leave people on high and dry. I think it's best practices and good manners to follow up with them and let them know, okay, hey, we're this is a status update on what we're doing with this particular position. So remember, we raised the question about what are legal considerations when deciding who to hire. Well, here we want you to be mindful of the legal considerations for final candidates. Okay, so drug testing. When it comes to drug testing, after conditional offers, a candidate can be asked to take a drug test. Okay, so after that offer has been made, then that's when you can do that. If you live in New York City, that is the law. Okay, for the Fair Chance Act. Okay, so but it's important to remember that even if a drug panel includes cannabis, it cannot be considered. And the reason why it cannot be considered is because cannabis is legal now. Okay, so that portion cannot be considered when it comes to determining factors. So as an employer, you can ask for a drug test, but if it's a legalized substance, i.e., cannabis, in this and during the final candidate space, it cannot be considered. All right. So background checks. New York State, you can it's any time, but remember local laws vary and usually it's only after conditional offer. So you just want to be very mindful of what the local laws state, okay? Um and employers cannot deny employment based solely upon criminal records. Okay, there are multiple factors to be considered when it comes to that, and those factors consist of identifying the job responsibilities and task, job relatedness, the amount of time passed, an applicant's age when the offense was committed. So if someone had a job had a criminal record from 2000 and it's 2024, like that ties in, and they were 14 at the time, and like that ties into the amount of time passed and the applicant's age, the seriousness of the offense, references, and the impact on work as well. So those are, like I said, there's multiple factors that have to be considered when a criminal record is the determining factor of denying employment. So I want you all to be mindful of that portion, okay? And that's a legal consideration for final candidates. That's what I want you to remember. And then lastly, too, I'm sorry, lastly, keeping criminal records and medical records confidential. You have to. That's required. Please be sure to do that. Um, to keep criminal records and medical information confidential. Okay, so we have covered a lot of good information and a lot of good materials. So, as an employer, you have developed your job requirements for the position. You've identified qualified applicants. You've decided who you want to interview from the applicant pool, and you've conducted successful interviews, which resulted in you, as the employer, choosing the best person to hire. Congratulations on that too. Okay, round of applause because you've gone through the steps that you need. Okay, so hiring the right cannabis employees best practices is a great way to ensure that you stay on track and are consistent with your goal. So remember, we want you all to be mindful that these steps are linear steps, okay? Which means that this is a process that builds off of each step. You cannot skip steps. So you cannot start with the job requirements, developing job requirements, and jump straight into conducting successful interviews. That's not how it works, okay? This is, if you follow the steps, it makes it easier. So here's a brief recap on the steps during the application process. Remember, the first step is to develop job requirements. The next step is finding qualified employees. Third step is you will decide who to interview after you've found the qualified employees. And after you decided who to interview, then you'll conduct successful interviews. Okay. And once you've conducted those successful interviews, you will go through the steps that we've provided and recommended to choose the best person to hire. Okay. Following these structured steps of the process, whenever you're seeking to find an employee, will ensure your search runs smoother. Okay. And if you get into the habit of making this the process, we believe that you will be better equipped to finding employees that will be successful at the job that you are seeking them to fill. And always remember that the overall goal as an employer, as you go through these steps, is to find an employee that will be successful in the job. So here are some best practices that we all want all employers to consider as you go through the steps of hiring the right employees. And I'm going to read them off because these are very important. Focus on job related duties and responsibilities. As you guys keep seeing, I keep saying that. That means it's important. Develop a clear job description. That's a best practice. Broaden your search options. Remember, I mentioned the multiple things that you can do. Be creative, look into the community, use job banks, use social media. Be creative, broaden those searches. Identify a method to evaluate and compare applicants, and then develop the same job related questions for all interviewees. You want to keep it consistent, okay? Be consistent with all interviewees. Be aware of the type, method, and timing of gathering information because there may be legal ramifications when it comes to that. And we don't want you all to get jammed up about something like that, okay? Follow up with all applicants once a person has been hired. And again, seek advice when unsure, when you're unsure about issues and legal considerations, okay? So this slide is a personal favorite. It's one of and is the last slide. Um, this sums up our goal to create a fair and equitable workplace throughout our educational trainings and courses at CWI. It starts with respecting employees and wanting a fair and equitable workplace that are inclusive and allow employees to have a voice, where employees are affirmed in the identity they have, where employees are treated with fairness and equity, and a safe working environment with good benefits and compensation. We believe that the hiring process plays a vital role in establishing this type of workplace, and we believe that you all can do that. So again, my name is Charles Johnson. This has been an absolute pleasure to educate you all on this topic. Please check out our website. It's at cannabisworkforce.org. We also have a QR code that you can scan, so make sure you grab your phone and scan that, or just take a screenshot or whatever the case may be to check out our website and check out our other courses too. We have a lot of courses that are there for employees and employers, up and coming employers, because we want to make sure that this industry is able to run smooth and effectively. Okay. So that completes my presentation, and now we can open the floor for any questions. Oh, okay. This is not actually a webinar. This is so you guys can just put the questions in the chat if you want to. Yeah, any questions that you guys may have. Or if you want to, you can if you want to you can remove your if you want to ask me verbally, you can ask that too, since this isn't a webinar. Thought it was. You want to raise your hand and then
Charles, there are one or two in the chat.
okay, let me look at right now. Um, do you have the slides in your website? Do we have the slides on our website? You talking about as far as the presentations? If so, then I believe so, Sarah. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I
Um,
don't think they're up on the site, but
not yet, not this one.
not this one, but
Yeah.
we can we can share the PDF with the library and they should be able to send them out to all of you.
Okay. I got you, Michael. Yes, yeah. So Sarah answered that. We have okay, I'm reading Michelle's. We have delivery at our store. We would like our drivers to be 25 or over for insurance reasons. How can we do this legally? I think that's no, you can. What do you mean? Can you do that legally? I think if you list that on your job application, and remember how I mentioned to you before, the preferred type of thing, you can list in there that you prefer 25, 25 or yeah, 25 or over, or whatever the case may be, or experience with driving. Again, um, that's all those are things that you can kind of list in the application or you can find out while you're doing the interview, but it's important that you're not asking somebody how old they are or something like that, because that's where the age discrimination and things of that nature come into play. But you can list on your application, age requirement or preferred, those things that you can list 25 plus or something to that extent. Is there any other yeah, because you can unmute yourself too. You can feel free to ask verbally because I thought this is Q&A, but yeah, y'all can ask me. What's up, brother?
Hi, my name is Lee. So my question is, are you familiar of a website called Vanks? Is there anything on this website that you use with the QR code similar to job postings?
I am not familiar with Vanks, but could you what are you asking?
Uh, so when you sign into the website, it shows like a 15-hour certificate of cultivation. Is there a section that shows job postings there?
Oh, and the job Cannalinks. Sarah, do you want to speak about the job Cannalinks piece?
Sure. So there's a couple different things, and I'm not quite sure what it is that you're asking about. If you're looking for job openings, um, yes, we have on our site, if you look at sort of across the top, all the way on the right is jobs. If you have a small screen, you might need to like click the arrow to look below. It is still in beta mode, but we're moving out of beta mode soon, so it should be, expanding soon. If you are an employer and looking to hire, this is obviously anyone on the call. By all means, we are free to post, and our learners, many of them have gone through our 15-hour certificate program. They not only have some knowledge, but they've also, we believe shown the interest and the motivation to take the time to learn about the industry and kind of find their way to a job that's a good fit. So I think it's a great opportunity both for job seekers and also for people looking to hire, to find folks who are eager to be part of this industry and kind of get what these jobs are really like. If you're looking for sample job descriptions, I'm not sure if that is what you're looking for. The DOL Seed, CEED site, and if you give me a second, I can find that link and drop it in the chat, has an incredible collection of, I think, around 50 like template job descriptions that are just free for folks to use. You can kind of, adapt it with the details where you need to. But it's an amazing resource for people who are kind of new to, being employers and new to putting these job descriptions together. It's really incredible. Give me a second and I'll find that and drop it in the chat.
Thank you so much, Charles and Sarah.
No problem, no problem. And David, you said, what do you mean by pass the personal questions during the interview? So I think what I'm assuming that you're asking, and if you want to, you can take yourself off of mute and you can ask in detail, David. But I believe that you're talking about in the greeting portion when I was telling you, or the types of questions. You want to make sure that you're focused on asking questions that are related to the job and the job duties and responsibilities. So a personal question is, hey, what's your favorite sports team? Type of thing. If and I say this because it sounds funny, but it's actually happening when you talk about implicit bias, where you're making determinations on things that aren't tied into the job duties and responsibilities. So if I say, hey, my favorite sports team is the Atlanta Falcons, and you're like, oh, well, I'm a Giants fan, and and that plays a particular a determining factor or something to that extent. Like there could be a bias that runs in here. Oh, we don't like those people, or they're a Boston Red Sox fan and I'm a Yankees fan, whatever. I'm just giving you using that as an example. The point is that you want to you're talking about the end where I was saying avoid personal issues. Yes. So sometimes people they'll bring in personal things, like I said, that aren't tied into the job description. Oh, I was a victim of this, or I'm related to this person, something to that extent, something to where it's not part of the consideration piece. And sometimes people do that. They make the interview become a personal sob story type of piece. That's why the example I gave you was, hey, this information is not going to be considered when it comes to the application, and then you want to move forward with it. Okay, hope that answers your question. Oh, I see your face. Hey, I love the locks, sister. I see you. You're on mute. You're on mute, but you can unmute yourself if you need to.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, no
Thank you, because
problem.
that part had me like confused, because if somebody like me, I have 7 children, so
Yeah.
like with like family issues and stuff, like how would you avoid questions like that?
When you say family issues, I think that it's because family, I wouldn't call them issues though, because I hate saying that with family. Family, like if let's
Okay.
just say if you need an accommodation or if you need things of that nature, then I think that that's where that is introduced. So if you are an employer and you receive somebody that's requesting an accommodation, like, hey, I have children, so can we do this at this time or whatever? Like that's something that you could potentially use. But you couldn't, as an employer, you don't want to ask them how many kids do you have or do you have any kids, because there have been situations where a person has said, hey, I have kids, or I have 7 kids, or I have 3 kids, and that has been used as a discriminatory factor against them. So this is why I
Yeah.
said you want to avoid the implicit bias, because some people are like, hey, that's why think about back to the example of where I asked, do you plan on having kids? That's one of those examples, because it's tied into your protected classes. And as a mother, you're protected. It's all types of things that you're a protected characteristic. And you don't want to open that door by asking somebody that or making that a determining factor when it really shouldn't matter. So again, you want to just be mindful of how you word things. And this is why I encourage you to speak to folks to help formulate like the proper wording if you're trying to get something conveyed. But the biggest thing is this all should be tied into the job though. Okay. That's the
Okay.
biggest thing you want to focus on.
And another thing, right? When you keep saying get assistance and get legal advice, meaning that get in contact with lawyers and stuff, like to this whole process, you have to, right?
When you say this whole process, what are you talking about? The process
Becoming,
of oh, licensed?
becoming, yeah, becoming a bartender.
Oh no, becoming a bud tender, that's a job that's in the dispensary. You don't need a lawyer to become a bud tender.
No, I'm saying
That's
on the hiring part.
oh,
Like
on the
if you want
hiring
to
part,
open
yeah,
your
I
own
always
dispensary.
yes, I always like I said, I always say to reach out to get to get legal advice, expert advice, or there are centers like Department of Labor. You can there's agencies or OCM, you know, when you're asking for clarity questions on things. You want to
Okay,
yeah, you know, that's what I'm talking about. You don't necessarily have to go out of pocket to go buy or to pay for a lawyer because you may not be able to get that. But there are attorneys that do pro bono things when it comes to this piece. And prime example, I live in Harlem. There's Harlem Business Alliance, and we've had attorneys that were there helping applicants for free, you know, when it comes to
okay,
processes and doing their SOPs and all that stuff. So there, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to pay, but I would strongly, as an attorney, I would strongly encourage you to
okay.
seek legal advice, you know, especially on
All
those
right.
things. Because last thing, you want to avoid any type of like financial, like somebody suing you saying that, oh, I was discriminated against because of my age or because of my race or because of this. And they say, well, why is that the case? Well, during my interview, this is what they asked me, and that's illegal, you know? Or they could report you to OCM, you know, like you guys
Yeah,
have worked too hard on your app on your licenses. That's what I'm saying.
right. Okay.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Are there any other questions? And yeah, you guys, listen, we in Zoom now, so y'all don't have to use the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask if you want to. Do we have any more? And I'm not gonna force you to ask any questions. So if you if you have questions, it's cool. But do we have any more questions? Oh, here it come. Here it come. Do employee do employees must be Michael, are you saying are employees required to be US citizens? Yeah, first and foremost, if they're not a U.S. citizen, they should have the proper legal paperwork to show that they're like able to legally work here. So I think that should be understood when it comes to your employees pieces. But then they have visas and they have all types of stuff that can be used because again, there's students that are doing research, you know, for the lab portions. I don't like, you know, like you can but they need to be they need to be legally documented. That's first and foremost. And they shouldn't be in plant touching jobs. That's number one. First and foremost, they should not be in plant touching jobs if they don't have that. Um, when you say when do you have to offer health care, the question is, are you have full-time employees? The minute that you have employees and they're full-time employees, then that should be counted towards your employee, I mean your insurance aspects of it. So, and we actually have a class too where we kind of talk about that piece. But yes, your employees are required to get health care. If you have a independent contractor, a 9-9 or whatnot, they're not required to have health care. But you have to make sure that they are actual independent contractors and you not just necessarily listing them as one. Because if they sue and say that you incorrectly classified them, because that's essentially what it is, then you could have legal ramifications. And I could give you an example of that too with Panera Bread that happened recently when they misclassified somebody, and that became a problem. Um, I hope that answers your question.
Charles, can
Wanna
I
c-
jump in for a second?
Please jump in.
Sorry, Michael, just to follow up on the citizenship thing, because I think this is important. Um, you know, if they have working papers, it might not be illegal for you to hire
Oh, I just
them,
saw he said work permit.
but it's we really strongly advise people who are not citizens not to work in sort of licensed, what's considered plant touching industries, at least at this time. Citizenship status is a federal issue, and we have heard about folks who have run into problems, even if they have a green card, even if they're legal to work, if they are paid by a licensed cannabis related company. An ancillary kind of supportive company is
Different.
probably not a problem. But if it's a license, yeah, I think in a dispensary situation, unfortunately, even if it's not a legal issue for you as the employer, it does it risks their status, and I think is not a great idea for folks.
No, no, it's
Just
not. And
wanted
then
to
also,
clarify that because I think
no,
it's
no,
important. Sorry,
thank you too,
Charles.
because I know I'm glad you did because I didn't see that he said work permit as I was talking, so I'm glad that you gave that clarity on that piece. And then yeah, because remember you go, this is a state law, you know, it's legal state-wise. Federally, it's not. Okay, until they declassify, reschedule, whatever. I mean, reschedule. Really, they need to deschedule. Um, then we can have those conversations. But right now, it's still federally legal, and especially now living in New York and not understand the political climate, we want to be very mindful because there's going to be targets on New York's back. So you don't want to have any reason for feds to come in and you know cause issues. Even if you're a dispensary licensee. Oh no, you said yeah. If you're a dispensary licensee, it's still a state license aspect. And going to Sarah's point, there have been reports of that across the state. So you just don't want to have to deal with that. Is there any other questions? It said you broke out. Your internet is chopped. Were you all able to hear the presentation though? Because I just saw something and Michael said it. You oh, it was earlier. Okay. Okay, good. I just want to make sure. Okay, cool. Yeah. Any other questions, y'all? Oh, got you, Michael. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, man. Any other questions? Going once. Hold information. Keep up. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Any other classes coming up? Sarah, any other classes coming up? We actually redid.
I don't think we have any sort of employer support classes scheduled at this time. Um, we will make the slides available to the folks at the library who should be able to share them with you all. But make sure that you are signed up for the CWI mailing list. It's
Yes.
cannabisworkforce.org if you're not already. Um, and that is the best way to know about new trainings, new events that we're part of coming up.
Yeah, and then also too, y'all, we do stuff all throughout the state as well. So this is a new class, so we will be transitioning, having, like she said, we don't have the slides there yet, but we plan on recording. We plan on doing all types of stuff though. So, but please sign up on our website and also make sure you guys follow us on IG too, because we're on IG and we also post up stuff on there too. And but yeah, anytime you guys, please, because it's other classes I do too, and I would love to have you guys there. But yeah. All right. 7:38 because I'm gonna get you guys out early. If there's any more questions, oh, let me see. Are you part of the class coming up at Toka Bar? I don't
Yeah,
think so.
that is our colleague April.
Oh, that's April. Yeah, that's not
Also
me,
about
unfortunately.
bud tending. Yep.
Yes.
That's us.
Yes,
That'll be
as
fun.
when you
She's a
say
lot of
are you,
fun.
yeah, he says are you, yeah. CWI is, yeah, but unfortunately, no, I'm not. I'll be doing some other classes, but that's one of our colleagues is there, so please check that out. Okay. I'm glad this is helpful for y'all because we've really put in a lot of work on this. And again, the industry looks like people like us, so this is really near and dear to our hearts. So I'm glad that you guys were able to receive this information. Okay. And again, please
Sorry,
check out our website. No, you're fine, Kimber. Please check out our website. And if you have a question, Kim, you can ask.
I do.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. So if I have to avoid having someone full-time insurance purposes and all that, health insurance, is it okay to hire a bud tender as an independent contractor and have them work? Is that something
So
that,
this is the thing about independent contractors. So technically, if a person is an independent contractor, that means that they have their own company. They're providing the services. You're not giving them anything. You know, they're pretty much telling you the terms and conditions of this because they're contracted out. If you have to provide them guidance, like, hey, these are your working hours. This is where you have to come. This is your shirt. Like, then they're not an independent contractor, and that's where I always say it's concerning. Um, it's a slippery slope when it comes to that piece though, but you want to be mindful because if someone finds out that it's a misclassification, or if something happens and they need insurance and they're like, oh, I'm fine with not having insurance, but then they end up needing it and they report it, that's a
Yeah.
problem. And if you have them, if you're not taxing them properly, or with their tax information, that could cost you a lot of money. That's where it's concerning.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. No problem, brother. Thank you so much for showing up. And plus, we're about to leave out with you too. If there's because there's no more questions, I'm gonna say going once, going twice. Because I mean, we're scheduled till 8, but it's 7:40.
No, 7:30.
Oh, so, excuse me, correction. So we still over. But yeah. If there's any questions, if there's no more questions, going once, going twice. I will see you guys again. Make sure you sign up. So whenever I do a class again, because I don't just do this class, I do some other classes. Make sure I see your faces or your names. All right. But anyway, thank you all so much. And thank you, Rochester Library, for holding it down. Lily.
Hi,
you're
yes,
able-
thank you. And everyone who's still there, this program was recorded and will be available on the library website. And also, plug for April, she is doing a program at the library on January 18th. It's a Saturday at 10. And the subject is industry overview and workers' rights and responsibilities.
Mhm. That's a good one. It's a good one, y'all. But okay. All right, perfect, y'all. Y'all have a great night. And hopefully we will be seeing you guys soon in our other courses, okay? No problem, David. No problem, Miss David. All right. Bye, y'all.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Yes.